I'm Tass Mellis of The Starters.
This is Ben Golliver with the Open Floor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff.
I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors.
Hey, I'm Elena Delanon, and welcome to the Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello there, guys. Welcome to the latest edition of the Double Clutch Podcast. I'm Joe Hulbert, one of your usual hosts and lead writers, and I'm joined once again by resident Australian and resident Phoenix Suns fan, David Nash. How is it going, David?
I'm doing well, Joe. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I've really enjoyed these second round series, which is what we're going to get into today. It's good to have you back. I remember a year ago, I believe you had just started podcasting with your greatly named 7 Seconds or Less podcast. Talk about how that's kind of gone for you this year.
Yeah, it's gone pretty well, Joe. The on-court stuff hasn't been great for us, but starting a podcast, they've given us plenty to talk about throughout the year. I think it was just our last episode where I was mentioning to my co-host Max that there's never a dull week as a Suns podcast or as a Suns fan. Obviously, with the Suns just firing and then hiring a new coach all within about 15 days of each other. So, yeah, it's been good. I think we're about 45 or so episodes deep now, and the listenership has had a steady increase across that, and we're still enjoying doing it. So it's been fun.
Yeah, ultimately that's what podcasting's about, isn't it? It's about enjoying doing it. And obviously, I imagine, was there a gap in the market for a Phoenix Suns podcast?
There wasn't, funnily enough. There's quite a few going on. And even a couple that have started around the same time as we did, and a couple since as well. But, you know, Max and I, we were discussing it. And my co-host Max lives in Phoenix. I live in Australia. And we just really enjoyed talking to each other about the Suns and decided to start something up and do something, I guess, what we felt was a little bit different, we like to think, in terms of maybe a gap in the market for the Suns pod that we do. We try and talk a little bit of general NBA as well, which we're going to do on this pod today, obviously. So I always have a keen eye on the rest of the league as well. And yeah, we cover kind of all sorts of topics. And yeah, the listeners have come along with us for the ride, which has been fun.
Yeah, it's good that you focus on all NBA, because that is our plan today. So we're going to start first sort of 15-20 minutes. We're going to talk about the two playoff series, the Milwaukee Bucks against the Celtics and the Rockets against the Warriors. I'm not discussing the other two because we're recording on Tuesday and it would all date very quickly by the time this goes out, and we could look very, very stupid very quickly if we fire out some hot takes that get disproven within hours of this being published. And then at the end, obviously, because David is a Phoenix Suns guy, we're going to talk about the Phoenix Suns, the coaching change they recently made, and what the future holds with their general manager James Jones. So we'll go straight into Bucks-Celtics. The Bucks beat the Celtics in Boston by 12 last night. There were boos at the end for the Boston Celtics, who, the first half, it was very even, but then the Celtics did what they've done whenever they've really lost a game this year. No ball movement, a lot of individual play, a lot of bad decision making, and Al Horford basically trying to hold all these different personalities, all these players that don't really mesh together. I mean, what have you made of this series generally, David?
It's been a pretty crazy swing, Joe. It seems like an eternity ago that Boston won that first game in Milwaukee, and it was kind of panic stations there for a little bit where everyone kind of thought, oh, here we go. The wheels have finally fallen off Milwaukee, and they're too dependent on their star in Giannis. But ever since, he's taken over and the team's kind of come along for the ride as well. Last night's game in particular was really interesting because kind of look at the box score, most of his, guys that usually help him along, the likes of Middleton, Lopez, all shot pretty poorly. Mirotic as well. They were all kind of horrible from deep and from around the floor as well. And I think the Celtics had him in foul trouble there for quite a while as well. So there was a crazy swing where Milwaukee's bench essentially grew the lead. Instead of, when you were watching, you were probably just thinking they needed to hang on for 4 or 5 more minutes so they could get the starters back in with enough time left. But, George Hill has been huge in this series, probably better than any guard on the Celtics. And that was kind of the story of last night's game, and probably the story of the series really is, as you said, there's not much meshing going on with the Celtics, whereas everyone's stepping up for the Bucks.
Yeah, so, I mean, when they put I watched the game in full and I watched it live. And you know when you're watching a game and you know it's been quite bad shooting, but you don't realise till they put the stats up.
Yeah.
They were both shooting, I think, 22% from beyond the arc when they put the graphics up about 3/4 of the way through the final quarter. And it was amazing to me to see how both teams responded. And for me, the way the two teams responded says a lot about kind of how we view this team and why one was the 1 seed and one was the 4 seed, because Milwaukee, when those shots weren't falling, they started cutting to the basket a lot more. They were getting guard post-ups and working off that. Boston just continued to jack up these terrible shots. Marcus Smart 1 for 7. Terry Rozier, oh my God, I've got to be careful when I talk about him because I'm not a fan of him at all. It was just a painful game. And Al Horford played relatively well, but when you look at this roster, David, I mean, on paper, it's very, very good, but do you think they've maybe got a problem with too many guys who are at their best kind of being these one-on-one isolation players? Because I'm looking at a team like Philadelphia. Philadelphia, they do have all these guys, but they've also got JJ Redick, who's constantly moving off the ball. And he will, I mean, out of nothing, JJ Redick will just come to the baseline, shoot a ridiculous jumper that would never go in for anyone else. But I don't think Boston have anyone like that you can lean on off the ball.
Yeah, it's a great point. I love how you keep referencing Al Horford trying to hold them all together, because that's definitely what he's been trying to do. Kyrie's obviously been wildly inefficient the last couple of games, and he's going to be the one that's taking the majority of the shots and down the stretch for the Celtics, and he just hasn't been hitting much at the moment. And the team, as you say, it just doesn't mesh together. There's a lot of isolation players on the team. Marcus Morris, I'm pretty familiar with from his Suns days. Jason Tatum's really struggled. I think he's only hit 1 3 for the entire series, or maybe even dating back to the previous series as well. As you say, Al's been really good, played 38 minutes last night. Maybe you need to start to lean on him a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, you look at that starting lineup: Tatum, Morris, Horford, Irving, Brown. There's not a lot of off-ball movement there, as you mentioned, and then they don't have a lot to go with off the bench as well. When Marcus Smart, obviously 15 minutes coming back from injury. Hopefully will be better for that run. Rozier is just not someone they've been able to count on all year. And that's really the point for me is, there's not many teams that can have a year like Boston did and then just turn it on in the playoffs. I think, on our podcast with Max, we've been talking about Philly maybe being a rare team who's been able to do that on occasions, but, they have even struggled against Toronto in the last 2 games. So it's really interesting that they're not clicking, they're not meshing, and you wonder what that means for, I guess, this playoff series, and then what it means for the offseason with, the Anthony Davis stuff and, maybe just needing to make a move to change this team around.
Yeah, there's going to be change because obviously Kyrie looks pretty much out there, and I think he's playing his way out of there. I wouldn't be surprised, actually. Someone on my timeline tweeted that, will he get booed when he returns to Boston next year with whoever it will be, New York, Clippers, maybe someone like the Nets, but someone replied to it saying, "Who's to say he doesn't get booed in the next Boston game?" If it does go to a game 6, it's been a weird series, but I've noticed a sort of strategic thing the Bucks are doing. So we spoke there about the lack of off-ball players. I think the Bucks have exploited that because when Kyrie or Rozier or Smart, whoever's handling the ball, whenever they go to the basket, the Bucks all series have given up the pick and pop attempt. Now, when I watch it live, I kind of think, Al Horford 3 of 8 last night. That's pretty good for a big man in this league, especially a guy who isn't a number 1 offensive option. But I think by letting Boston do that, they are basically exploiting the lack of off-ball motion in the sets and the lack of off-ball motion from these players, because the only way the Celtics have really generated threes at times this year is by someone closing out on Al Horford, him pump faking, someone else coming across to help, and then kicking it to the corner. I think by allowing him that pick and pop attempt, I think you are taking away the Celtics perimeter game, because last night they did not create a lot of open looks.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. You've definitely looked at it a little bit deeper than I have. I'm not that familiar, I guess, with the Celtics, in season sets and things. But, when Al Horford's taking 8 threes and that's half of his field goal attempts for the game, you kind of, as you say, it's playing into your hands a little bit as a defense. As you said, Marcus Smart 1 for 7 as well. So even just looking at the box score, if you weren't watching the game, your point is valid. You would kind of say that the Bucks have essentially given the Celtics the shots that they want them to take and minimize the effectiveness of guys like Kyrie. Jaylen Brown, as you said, is probably the one in that starting lineup that can get moving off the ball and cut. But, Al is used to playing in those high motion offenses. And if you're kind of leaving him on an island there, I think it was Zach Lowe and Stan Van Gundy the other day who were talking about on a podcast around, you kind of don't mind Al Horford shooting those shots on an island because he's already kind of second guessing himself because he's not that used to it, as you said, particularly not at that kind of volume, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, he's, in Atlanta. I think the thing with what the value Al Horford brings is the spacing, but I think the Bucks, they are living with that spacing. They're not letting it worry them. They're making sure that they basically mark the other 4 guys because there's just not a lot of movement. We'll go on to Kyrie Irving now because this has been very, very interesting to watch throughout the playoffs because he's had a really good season. I think there's a little bit of revisionism going on, as there always is on NBA Twitter, as you know. But the last 3 games are combined 19 for 62 from the field, 4 for 20 beyond the arc. I mean, there's a couple of people, cynical people, but smart people that I follow have this theory that this is what a Kyrie Irving-led team will look like. We spoke about the lack of off-ball motion. We spoke about the bad decision-making. But do you think it's harsh to blame the decision-making of guys like Smart, Tatum, Brown? Do you think it's harsh to blame that on Kyrie?
I think it is a little harsh, yeah. I'm a Kyrie fan. I'm certainly no apologist, and he's had a pretty shocking playoff series. And if this is how he leaves Boston, it would kind of leave a sour taste in everyone's mouth. But, above everything else, he's shooting under 40% on the whole, playoffs so far, which is obviously not ideal for Kyrie Irving, and only 33% from 3 on 6.5 attempts a game. So, but to, I guess, make at least some excuses for him, you look again at that starting lineup. He's got Marcus Morris, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown in the starting lineup. So I wouldn't even say this is a Kyrie Irving-led offense, or certainly not an ideal one that you'd look to build around Kyrie if you committed all the way. I think Boston's problem from the outset this season, and it's kind of materializing in the playoffs, is they haven't really created an optimal starting 5 around Kyrie Irving, whether that's been due to injuries or these kind of moving parts and pieces that they've got. But I think it is a little unfair to say that this is how a Kyrie Irving offense maxes out, because I just don't think the pieces around him in that starting 5 in particular are what you would pick if you were looking into an ideal situation of building around Kyrie. So that'll be interesting from free agency standpoint, and the team that does eventually land him, how they look to build better around him, and I guess whether there's a second star, because, I guess for the other side of the coin, where he has done well, people will say he's always had LeBron James with him, which is a pretty good offsider to have next to you.
Yeah, I agree with you on the team building. I mean, he's been linked with the Brooklyn Nets a lot in free agency, and I think that kind of setup is what I would build around him. You've got a great role man in Jarrett Allen. You've got a guy who gets extra possessions in Ed Davis, but you've got the shooters. You've got that off-ball motion. And you look at what D'Angelo, because, I mean, again, as you've probably seen on Twitter, I'm a bit of a D'Angelo Russell denier. I think he's okay. I think he's a bit of a one-trick pony. You put Kyrie Irving in that offense, I think it elevates him, and I think it elevates that team as well. Boston, I think, responded to LeBron James actually being in the conference by loading up on big physical players who can match up to him. Guys like Tatum, Brown, and Morris. They can all. There's no such thing as LeBron stopper, but I look back at game 1 of this series. The problem the Bucks had was they couldn't create any mismatches against that trio because they can all defend those 1 through 4 positions pretty well. They're all physical, and they were disrupting Giannis. They were disrupting Bledsoe, who I don't think's had a great series, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you kind of think the Celtics maybe need to lean, because Morris is potentially going as well? I think he's going to get a nice free agency deal somewhere. I know our resident Suns fan, Ross McLeod, is a Scotsman, diehard Suns fan. He's not a big fan of the Morris twins. I'm a big fan of Marcus, and not so much a fan of his brother. I think Marcus will go and get a nice little contract somewhere as a piece, but I just kind of think they've already got players like him on this team.
Yeah, both the Morris brothers kind of left the desert in tumultuous fashion. So maybe being a little harsh on Marcus, he was kind of shipped out in the hope that we were going to land LaMarcus Aldridge, and then had some, I guess, negative comments to say about the team after the fact. But yeah, you won't find too many Suns fans that are fan of the Morris twins. But, they're 29 years old, so they're right in that little pocket of hopefully getting one last good deal. Markieff, as you said, will probably get the bum end of the stick there, and Marcus should hopefully be able to pick up a decent deal for himself somewhere else out of Boston. But this is kind of the story with Marcus Morris. It happened in Phoenix. It happened in Detroit after that. He is very streaky. You learn to love him, but then, when push comes to shove, he gets a little ISO heavy, plays a little bit too much like a ball dominant superstar. And, the weaknesses kind of bear themselves out. And you, when he comes out of contract or you're looking to change the team around, he's one of the first guys that you kind of go, yeah, we can do without him. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands. But yeah, Boston overall, as you said, very wing heavy. The league, we've noted on our podcast, the league almost in these playoffs, the guard play has been heavy, and the guards have certainly let the team down for Boston, but they also haven't had a lot of options to go to as well when you look at that bench.
No, I think with that Kings pit they've got, which will probably fall between 12 and 14, I think they're going to, they should target an off-ball player, because right now there's too many cooks. And I think Bill Simmons kind of gets ridiculed for his tweets, but I think he's been on the money with the fact that this Boston team at times is very unwatchable. And a couple of podcasts ago, me and Jamie, one of our other contributors, we spoke about now how roster building is about finding the balance between on and off-ball players. I think that is what makes things smooth, and I think that's what ultimately makes offensive sets work. If you haven't got guys who can move off the ball, it's hard to design really creative and innovative offensive sets. We'll move on now to two very, very different teams. One team who use a lot of offensive sets, one who, if the first 7 seconds don't generate some kind of pull-up three, they revert to a 1-4 or 1-5 ISO. We got the Rockets against the Warriors. The Rockets pulled it back last night to 2-2. I've got to say, after watching the first two games, I didn't think that would happen. James Harden looked a little bit more comfortable last night, stopped with the flopping, just played his game, relied more on getting to the rim rather than those floaters he's been using this year. What have you kind of made of this series? Because it's been one that's been quite weird in the general thing about who is the best player in the NBA debate.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly not alone in thinking that when it was 2-0 in favor of the Warriors, that the series was going to likely be over. It's been pretty impressive to see Houston grind out these last two games and get it back to even. And I guess it's up to the Warriors to respond now. They look a little defeated almost, even at 2-2, and like they weren't expecting this little fight back from the Rockets. But they're just being gritty. They've been, super impressive to watch. Guys are stepping up. Capella, for all his faults, in I think Game 3 had a pretty big game. Wasn't so good in Game 4. But then, Austin Rivers steps up and plays 33 minutes, and they kind of go with Rivers, Gordon, Harden, Chris Paul, and PJ Tucker for pretty big minutes down the stretch. So that's the really interesting thing. You kind of look at the Warriors bench. They're not getting really anything out of their bench now that they've moved Iggy into the starting lineup. So, heavy minutes in both of these starting lineups. But, probably shout out Eric Gordon, to be perfectly honest. Harden can't do it all. Chris Paul has been subpar in most of their playoff games. Maybe subpar is a little bit harsh, but a little bit in the background when you kind of need that Rob to Suns Batman. So Eric Gordon's really stepped into that role. He's the kind of second leading scorer on the team for the playoffs overall, and is shooting 41% from three in the playoffs overall in 9 games. So he's been the really interesting one, and the one that's kind of giving him buckets when it's not James Harden.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've been really impressed with, and this has been now for pretty much since joining the Rockets. PJ Tucker has been amazing. He's I think one of the problems teams have when they go to a small centre is that at times they don't necessarily make the right reads out of pick and roll. He is so good at making those little skip passes to the corner. He's he is one of the most, I'm not talking about him as one of the best players in the league, but in terms of what he brings to that system and the flexibility he gives the Rockets with their lineups, there are not many players in that build who can play centre and really, really handle it. And he's been big because the Rockets' plan against the Warriors has always been to chase Steph off the three-point line and live with those layups, because they know that Steph Curry lives and dies by being a shooter. He's and obviously there's a bit of analytics in there as well. The 3 is worth more than the 2, so you give up the 2 rather than the 3 with a shooter that good. But I think Tucker has been big in just kind of being that anchor in the middle. I mean, Clint Capella he didn't really have a very successful free agency like he expected to, and I'm wondering if maybe a lot of teams foresaw this, where he was going to be sort of played off in the playoffs. Maybe I'm being harsh, and maybe that speaks a bit more to how good PJ Tucker is.
Yeah, and I mean, how good the Warriors are. Any little weakness, particularly in big men, and you are played off the floor. And we've seen it in the playoffs. Houston did it to some degree to Rudy Gobert as well. As a Suns fan, taking DeAndre Ayton, number 1, who we might get into a little bit later, that's the biggest, question mark right now. Is he going to fall into that mold when hopefully the Suns are back in the playoffs at some point, and is he going to be a guy that gets played off the floor? We'll see, hopefully sooner rather than later, as I said. But I'm glad you mentioned PJ Tucker, one of my favorite players in the league. I think the general NBA audience is finally getting to see in the last couple of years what Phoenix fans saw on some okay and bad teams for quite a few years when he was with Phoenix. But he's got the best plus minus on the whole team at the moment through the playoff series. He's shooting 43.5% from 3 on over 5 attempts a game. As you said, they're playing him as that small ball 5 down the stretch, and he's making plays. He's making those little skip pass reads. He's hitting buckets when they need him, and he's just playing great defense, getting those crucial rebounds. And that's PJ Tucker. He gets every ounce of talent out of himself and plays well above himself in the big moments. And they're the kind of guys that you need down the stretch in the playoffs. And Houston just hit a real bargain there with PJ.
Yeah, I think when he got when the Toronto Raptors moved to him, I think because he was hyped as this LeBron stopper, and I think the average fan who will just watch the playoffs, I think they saw him not be a LeBron stopper because there's no such thing. And I'm wondering if that kind of lowered the opinion of him across the league. It shouldn't have, because there's no shame in not being a LeBron James stopper, but he has really, I think every year someone kind of, I don't want to say breaks out, because anyone who's watched the NBA for a long time knows how good this guy is and knows how good he has been on some pretty average teams. But you see a guy every year who people start to know. People go, wow, this guy's actually pretty good. We've had a few of those over the years, and I'm wondering if Tucker has been that guy this year, because he pretty much embodies this Rockets team. They are very different to what they were last year, and I'm going to pose this question to you that has been asked a lot. Do you think they are better than they were last year? Because I've seen that trotted around quite often.
It's an interesting question. They obviously had the likes of Trevor Ariza last year. I've seen a few conversations around, what would Trevor Ariza do to this team if they were able to keep the rest of the pieces? Maybe, if you're playing him instead of, I guess, someone like Daniel House Jr. on this team. But, I think, Daryl Morey was, you really put a lot of it on him early on in the year and said it was kind of his fault. They got a few of those early moves wrong. Melo's obviously one of them. Daniel House had his own contract situation going on, so he didn't come back permanently until the very end of the year. So, probably a regular season team overall, it wasn't a better team. But, this team now that's pushed Golden State to 2-2, who knows what's going to happen from here. But, yeah, I think there's definitely an argument there. I think Harden, I don't know what the simple box stat score, comparison would show from this season to last season or this playoffs to last playoffs. But as you mentioned just earlier, he's playing smarter, he's developing, he's definitely matured since, even just last playoffs. Chris Paul's probably a little bit down on the Chris Paul that healthy Chris Paul they got at certain points in the playoffs last year. And, as you said, PJ Tucker and, as I mentioned before, Eric Gordon are probably playing above themselves. So, yeah, it's pretty even, to be honest, and pretty hard predicting from day to day in the NBA at the moment. But I guess it's all going to come down to whether they can push Golden State to 7 games here. And I guess then they're, maybe if they can win or at least really push them in Game 7, there's a real conversation that it was a better team than last season.
Yeah, they're certainly very different. I mean, last year they have the same shot profile this year. They shot over 50% of their shots from beyond the arc last year. They've done the same again this year, but there's different method about how they're doing it. Last year they did have a lot of ball screens off the ball movement throughout the shot clock. Now it's not really been the case. James Harden, I think, is averaging 4 times more isolations than the second most guy, which I believe was John Wall before his injury. So yeah, they're certainly not. I think they're quite a controversial team. I mean, personally, this is a debate we have had in every group chat. I don't like watching them. I like watching ball movement, ball screens, player movement. I don't like watching. And that's not me taking away from what they've done. But if I'm staying up till 2 a.m, like I do most nights to watch NBA, I want to watch a team that I enjoy watching. And we had Kurt Goldsberry on our last podcast, and he pretty much said the same thing. He said that a lot of people he speaks to in the industry, I mean, we're talking ESPN writers, they say the same thing, that the Rockets are actually maybe taking the NBA down a path that we might not like, because it is all about the isolation basketball to generate buckets for stars. Post play's dead, and I'm wondering if the way the Rockets have played this year is going to change the way schemes are designed.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. You have to respect it. They've built a game plan around their personnel and their star, I suppose. I tend to agree with you. It's not the prettiest basketball. It's not for the purists that love ball movement. I'm definitely leaning towards your side of someone that loves a lot of misdirection, a lot of ball movement. But you got to respect it. And, when everyone's trying to, and has been trying to come up with a way to beat Golden State for the last 4 or 5 years, as they just get stronger and stronger, Houston have probably been the team that have been at least able to show that they can push them and maybe push them again to 7 games in this series. So, it's a tough one. I agree with you. I'm often watching basketball at weird times, and there's probably some other teams that I'd prefer to watch than Houston, but nothing but respect for what they're doing right now and taking it up to the Warriors.
Yeah, shout out to former Phoenix Suns coach Mike D'Antoni, who did a great job this year. I think he should have got some Coach of the Year votes for how he navigated that tough start and how he pretty much with the help of Daryl Morey's analytics, how he kind of shaped this team. And that seems like a good transition into probably the main reason you wanted to come on the show to talk about your Phoenix Suns, a team that I hope you don't take offence to this, but I can't imagine many UK fans stayed up until I believe your game started either 2:30 or 3 in the morning our time. I cannot imagine there were many people who would have stayed up, but you're still an interesting team that were followed a lot this year, certainly by X's and O's guys, because Igor Kokoskov ran, even though the offensive efficiency didn't necessarily match it, but that's more of a reflection of the roster rather than his offensive scheme. His sets were some of the best. Mm-hmm. But, as I know you were very sad about from following your your Twitter feed, you were very upset when he was fired after 1 year in the job, not having a point guard until the end of the year. And Tyler Johnson isn't really a point guard anyway. I covered him at the Heat. I don't know what he is, but he's not the traditional point guard that you need if you want to run a sets-based offense. You replaced him with Monty Williams. I've got a strong opinion on the change. First of all, what was your immediate reaction to the Eagles firing? Were you surprised?
I was a little surprised, but I kind of expected it. There was a lot of Suns media and people that follow the Suns on Twitter who had essentially commented as the season ended that if we weren't going to get any sort of confirmation out of the team in terms of Igor's future, and the longer that dragged on, there was always going to be a chance that he was fired. And he said a few things himself in his exit interview that kind of lent for people to read the tea leaves a little bit, that he was maybe not too confident himself. I think we can see it now. There was a clear disconnect between him and the front office that essentially changed, I think, 8 days before the season started, and the GM that hired Igor was fired himself. So, it was a season of discontent, really, and unstableness, which as Suns fans, we're pretty used to these days. So, I had my rant on my podcast. That's a great thing of having your own podcast, is you can talk about what you want to. And I had a 20-minute rant. If there's any Suns fans or anyone that just wants to hear an Australian go off on his team for about 20 minutes, and then I kind of left it in the past. And to be honest, the Suns moved on pretty quickly, and as you said, hired their new coach. So there hasn't been a lot of time to sit and wallow in Igor's firing, because, as you say, we now have a new head coach in Monty Williams, and someone else to talk about other than how Igor went last season.
Yeah, I mean, you went on a 20-minute rant, and I think my podcast editors would kill me if you went on another one, because they have to edit this tonight. But can you just, for our listeners, can you just kind of summarize some of the things you ranted about with regards to Igor, and maybe, basically, did you kind of defend Igor in this rant?
I did. I defended Igor. I was probably one of the strongest people that approved of the hire of this kind of unknown guy to a lot of Suns fans when he was first hired. I was very familiar with him, did a lot of research on him before the Suns hired him, because I got an inkling that it was going to be a hire that happened. And, to lay it out in the timeline of things without going on a 20-minute rant, you mentioned one of the things up the top there. I've already mentioned one. They're probably two of the more important ones. The GM was fired 8 days before the season started, which is not ideal. They also didn't give him a starting point guard for the entire season. So an X's and O's rookie head coach who was always going to need the personnel to try and get everyone to buy in early on, wasn't really given a roster to allow him to coach to his strengths. So they were the big things. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff in between, the injuries, the roster makeup. We had trades for Tyler Johnson and Kelly Oubre. The Suns went on a bit of a stretch after the All-Star break and were kind of playing at a 500 pace for about 12 games there, when they had the healthiest, talented roster, so to speak, after the All-Star break, with the likes of Booker, Ayton, Johnson and Oubre, as I mentioned, and a few other pieces in between. Mikal Bridges and Rashawn Holmes were pretty pivotal in those moments as well. So, I think, I thought that Igor showed his talent as a head coach in the very small patches that he actually had NBA talent to work with. And I think now we know there was a huge disconnect there, and it may have been the right move for the franchise to move on. But I don't think the 2018-19 season says really anything at all about Igor's head coaching ability in the NBA, and hopefully he gets another chance, because he was really set up to fail. And that was the crux of my rant, Joe, was that they set him up at every turn to fail, and it was no surprise by the end what happened, because of what the front office and the organization gave him as a rookie head coach in the NBA.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, I think a guy who runs all this creative sets, it needs a point guard. Tyus Jones was the one who's always limped. That's not happening now, because he is our starting point guard for the near future. But You need a point guard like that who just puts the ball in the right spots, can call sets like Tyus does for us. You got Tyler Johnson at the end. He's I kind of liked him a little bit in Miami, more for he was very valuable for where they got him. It wasn't a high pick or anything like that. I'm not sure he's a point guard, really. I think he's a downhill guard. I see it as a difference. He's not the pure point guard in the sense that he's going to call out sets. He doesn't necessarily make the smart plays all the time. He's aggressive, and that's always good. It collapses the defense. Fitted Miami's driving kit philosophy, but I'm not sure he was ever the answer. I think in terms of the Monty Williams hiring, I'll give you my take on it before I ask for yours. I've never been a huge fan of him. He seems like a very nice guy. He's got good relationships with players throughout the league. I believe he's friends with a lot of big players, your LeBron Jameses, people like that. But and Anthony Davis, I believe he's friends with. But I was never a fan of what he did in New Orleans. They were a team I covered for a little bit. I thought his offensive sets were very... If you compare them to Eagles, and I know a lot could have changed in those 5 years, but if you're comparing them to Eagles, for me, they're not close. They've got... his one real success was making the AFC with the Pelicans, and I know I shouldn't take that away from him. They got there by default because the Thunder had a lot of injuries at the end of the season, and I believe they blew it in their last 5 games. I am not sold on him being this amazing coaching candidate that the league seems to think he is. He's a good assistant. Brett Brown has said as much. I'm just not sold that this is the guy who's gonna take this Suns team to the next level.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. He's going to be the direct opposite of Igor, and a lot of fans are probably going to be happy about that because there were a lot of fans that didn't like Igor Kokoskov as an overall head coach. I think the thing to note here for any non-Suns fans listening or any Suns fans even, I guess it's just my opinion, but James Jones has already come out and said a couple of times in a radio interview, he was on The Jump yesterday, I believe, that the Suns are essentially hitting the reset button here and trying to start a culture again. And they've pegged Monty as the kind of guy that they can do that with. So, I would say they've taken a different approach with head coach here and gone away from a guy like Igor, who's most of his strengths are going to be on the court. And they've gone a guy like Monty, who, as you said, has a great reputation around the league. Kevin Durant, I believe, called him the best man he knows. As you said, he's got great relationships with many high-profile players. I don't think that's going to mean that the Suns are going to, attract high-profile players straight away to this team and this organization. But they're really challenging him with turning the franchise's reputation around. And, I've made the comparison at this stage until we at least see whether he's morphed into a more modern coach, that he's essentially going to be the Suns' Mark Jackson with the Warriors. And he's going to be the guy that hopefully gets a lot of these young guys playing the right way, gets in their face a little bit, which is not a strength of Igor's, holds them accountable and tries to turn the team around, as I said, and then maybe they flip in year 3 or 4. He does have a 5-year contract, so it'll be interesting to see whether he sees that out, because not many coaches do with the Suns. They generally get paid to leave. But, I think at some point, if he hasn't changed as a X's and O's coach since those Pelicans teams, maybe someone else will come in like Steve Kerr did down the road with the Suns. But for now, he looks like a decent fit, at least to change the fortunes of the franchise, which was going along at a pretty crappy pace for quite a while there, Joe.
It was a rough year. I mean, I expected you to be... I remember we did the over-unders, and I think we both had them. The over-under was like 28 or 29. I think we both had them over.
Yeah.
It really bottomed out at times, but there were positives. You look to have had a pretty good draft. Mikal Bridges looks very, very good. His net rating stats, I mean, you might tell me they were misleading. I don't know, because obviously you watched the team more than I did, but I was impressed with what I saw from him. He looks like the kind of player that you need on a team. We spoke earlier about the Boston Celtics not having many off-ball threats. I think they could do with a player in that mold. But DeAndre Ayton, I'm not going to talk about Luka Doncic or Jaren Jackson, but just Ayton the player. Forget that you took him at 1. What was he good in his rookie season?
I was quite impressed with Ayton, to be honest. I had him at kind of number 2 or 1B, as I put it, towards the end there before the draft, just behind Luka Doncic. I definitely wanted the Suns to take Luka, particularly with the Igor connection, which is another thing that they kind of failed him on there. But, Ayton overall, over the 70 or so games that he played, I was really impressed. He's quite raw. I think one thing that the Suns' local media did a disservice to DeAndre with is kind of pretending like he was just going to come in and dominate from the outset. There's a lot of things that took him quite a while and are still going to take him quite a while to grasp. He's, not great at putting the ball on the floor. His defensive instincts aren't great, but, to push to the positive side, his touch is phenomenal for a guy at 20 years of age in his rookie season in the NBA. I was floored at times. He is huge out there on the court. And then I guess harking back to what we were talking about before, I've got real hopes that in meaningful playoff games in the future, he is going to be able to stay out on the court, because his offensive game is ridiculous, and they're going to be able to use him in a way that he's much more effective than a Clint Capella or a Rudy Gobert. And he's, I think, going to be able to stay out there in the modern NBA because he can really move his feet on the perimeter. His kind of weaknesses are more weak side shot blocking, and keeping up with sets, but in terms of raw tools and instincts, it's all there. And pretty impressive season from DeAndre, and a historical one, as many people have noted, with kind of averaging a double at a pretty crazy efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I follow a lot of film guys. I believe I follow Suns Film Room, and you could see just in the clips they posted that his defense did kind of improve at times as the year went on. The plays the plays I watched in the season, I thought, oh my God, this is not good. But towards the end of the season, you saw his instincts get a little bit better. He was being a bit of a deterrent at times, which I think is very big. If you can force a lot of these elite guards and wings to just take that extra second to think, that's enough to disrupt a lot of offensive sets. Just that extra second, it gives that's a second other guys get time to recover. I think he obviously, unfortunately, he's going to get sort of this held over his head for a long time because of who was selected after him. And I'm wondering if maybe that's going to kind of be a big referendum on the end of the Ryan McDonough era. That might be seen as his worst mistake. But Ayton could turn out to be a very good player. The other guy you got was Michael Bridges. What did you kind of make of his rookie year?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on the end there with DeAndre, I think Igor did a great job of simplifying things towards the end of the season. We even saw him go on to Giannis and LeBron late in games, or for whole games really, but late in the season. And that's where we really saw a simplified role pay dividends for DeAndre. And yeah, as you said, the number one pick stuff is always going to hold over him. But a great thing just to end on DeAndre, I suppose, is he doesn't seem to have the mentality where that's going to really bother him like we've seen with other top picks in the past. He's kind of his own man, so I don't have too many concerns there. But yeah, to your question about Mikal, loved his season. One reason why I was able to watch all 82 games and sometimes a second time to cut film and things like that is, even on a 19-win team like this, is the lack of Mikal. He was really fun to watch. The jump shot was frustrating. He only shot 33% from 3 in the end, which was supposed to be one of his strengths. He kind of tinkered with it all season, broke it down a little bit. It was very robotic at times, particularly when he was left wide open. So that's going to be something to watch going into his sophomore season. But the defense, the IQ, you can really see it out there with Mikal. And as you mentioned at the top there, I'm really high on him. I think he's virtually untouchable on this team because I think he just is the perfect piece to a DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker-led offense. Him out on the wing, hitting shots and playing defense and making the right play is kind of the perfect thing for this Suns team.
Yeah, I liked him. I think he was my number 3 or 4 player. It was number 4, I believe, behind Doncic, Jackson and Young. I believe I had Jackson at 1. So I liked what he brought. He scored. Play type stats for college are kind of, people don't like using them because they often say more about the scheme and the surrounding talent. But I think when you perform that well in that many play types, that does matter. It doesn't necessarily matter who you're surrounded by. If you're scoring on every possible play type, that's good. There have been occasions, I remember Sidarius Thornwell, for example, scored a lot and he's not really turned out to much, but for a first round talent, that was impressive. When we last podcasted, I gave you a take of mine that I said the 3 players you took in last year's draft would all be starting within 2 years. We've spoken about Ayton and Bridges. Before we get on to Devin Booker, because I want to end on him because he's probably your most positive piece moving forward, but Ilya Koba played 53 games, 16 starts. I've got to say, the stats don't look great. He was high on my board as well. I thought he would ride that pull-up jumper to be one of the next very good point guards. What did you kind of see from him in your first year? Because I think, my personal take is from the outside, I don't think he was helped by the fact that you didn't have a point guard for a lot of the season. I think there was too much pressure on a guy coming from a very small French team to the NBA.
Yeah, the ironic thing about not having a point guard is then they also had 2 rookie point guards in Ali and DeAnthony Melton. So they kind of battled it out all season, and Melton seemed to have the trust of Igor over Ali because he was a little sturdier out there, a little more willing to give the ball up and play off ball, and probably had the most NBA-ready skill on defense out of the 2 prospects. So Igor tended to lean towards putting DeAnthony out there over Ali. But, Ali showed flashes. He had a couple of big games when they kind of got him out there for big minutes, and he seemed like a player that was really bereft of confidence and one that needed to get out there for extended minutes. And I think we saw that in the fact that all of his good games in a Suns uniform this year was when he was given an opportunity to either start or go out there and play, extended minutes that he knew were coming before the game even started. So I think it's a confidence thing for Ali. I think all the tools are there. As you said, he's kind of got that sweet jump shot. He struggled to finish around the rim. And I think Igor was overall just frustrated by him, which is why he didn't get a lot of opportunity on this Suns team. And, the impressive thing about Ayton and Bridges is, there wasn't, as you noted, a lot of veterans around these guys to protect them. They were kind of thrown into the fire. So Ali was probably one that got burnt a little bit by that, whereas the other rookies kind of came out the other side with a little bit of progress. But not over for Ali, but it's just going to be interesting with this team, a new GM setup, a new front office setup. And if you look down the roster, it's still very young and wants to improve very quickly. So there's going to be some decisions made on some of these young guys, and they might get thrown into trades if the Suns look to try and bring in some more veterans. So it will be interesting to see whether Ali and DeAnthony both make the team next year or are on the roster.
Wow, look, you think they might not be on the roster?
I could see them go out in trades. They're not going to cut them, obviously. Very valuable contracts at the moment. Ali's more so valuable than DeAnthony Melton's because he's got the full 4-year rookie scale, whereas Melton they could only sign for 2. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Ali chosen just outside the first round is a piece that gets thrown into a bigger trade, Joe.
I would very much love Minnesota to be a part of that trade and get him in, because I still, again, obviously you've seen a lot more of him than me, but I think in the right situation we could really unlock that pull-up jumper that made him. I think I had him 12 or 13 on my board, which was higher than most people, probably higher than his family had him. So, we will. I spoke about Devin Booker. I've some listeners probably thinking, Joe, how have you not brought up Devin Booker? I want to finish on him because it was a rough season for the Suns. he was the bright spot. He is the most unfairly criticised guy in the NBA right now. People blaming him for the Suns being at the bottom. David, what is it like to watch? Is Devin Booker what keeps Suns fans going?
Oh, 100%. I've seen a lot of Suns fans this year through all the turmoil kind of say that they're attached to the Suns as long as Booker's still on the team, but they may look to give up their Suns membership if and when Devin demands a trade. And the funny thing is with all the drama around the Suns and recent superstars that we've seen demand trades and fans turn on them, I don't think there's many Suns fans at all that would turn on Devin Booker if, in 1 or 2 years' time he decided that enough was enough and he wanted to be traded to a decent playoff team if the Suns weren't there yet, because he's just had a hell of a first 4 years in the NBA, no continuity, didn't help this year with a lot of injuries on himself, which, a lot of them was soft tissue, so not exactly his fault in preparation or anything like that, I wouldn't have thought. But he had a hand surgery before the season started, was another reason why I thought it was very harsh on Igor, because he had to go into his training camp and preseason trying to teach the offense without his number one star playable or being able to train or go to camp. So that was pretty rough on Igor before the season had even started. But when Devin Booker was healthy, we saw it in the first couple of games before he did his first hamstring, and then towards the end of the year when the season was over and he had some of those crazy games. When he was healthy, that's the best I've seen him. He took another leap this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he takes another leap next year and maybe that three-point shot comes back a little bit, because he was pretty down, 33% this year, which was a little bit disappointing. But his efficiency inside the arc, his playmaking that he showed, increased IQ, his maturity on a pretty struggling team. I don't have much negative to say about Devin Booker other than the fact that, I just hope that he can have a decent team around him at some point soon, because I agree with you. A lot of the criticism to him is just very much uncalled for, and really he's just a lightning rod because he's pretty much been the only good player on this team for a few seasons now.
Yeah, I think people are unrealistic about how they believe a star can elevate a team. I don't think there's a player I'd put on this team. I'm talking even the best players in the league. There's not a player I'd put with this roster and think that they're going to elevate it to like a playoff seed. I think that was that for me, for the Booker haters, that is the only thing that will ever validate, that will ever kind of make them change their take if he somehow leads this jumbled roster to a playoff spot. You've got a new general manager there, Ryan McDonough, after, in my opinion, years of poor draft selections. Just generally quite a weird reign. I didn't understand the direction. Sometimes he was trying to go for these win now moves, the LaMarcus Aldridge move. Other times he was not doing that. I didn't understand it. But you've now got James Jones. He's made, from the outside, I think he's made a couple of nice moves so far. I like DeAnthony Melton. I think Tyler Johnson was I think he's a decent pickup. I think he's a player that can help you. Do Suns fans kind of trust in James Jones at the moment, or is it more that you feel you don't really have a choice?
It's probably more that we feel like we don't have a choice right now. He is the man that's been thrust into the spotlight as the new GM. Right now, I think Suns fans are hoping that he's the man and that he has Robert Sarver's trust to at least make the decisions and not have the owner meddle too much, because for any Ryan McDonough apologists out there, I'm sure there are a few, I think they would say that a lot of the bad decisions in Ryan McDonough's tenure were because of meddling from ownership and differing opinions from season to season on whether they wanted to be a contender or a tanking team. So, I think in hindsight, as you say, McDonough's tenure was pretty tumultuous, littered with mostly bad draft picks other than probably Devin Booker and to a lesser degree TJ Warren. And it was time for him to go. If anything, he probably should have gone 2 seasons ago when they extended him and brought James Jones in as his assistant. I said on my podcast last week, they really just wasted a season with the Igor hire as high as I was on Igor and will continue to be as a coach. Just wasn't the direction of the team. They had a lame duck GM who then took over one of the most important off seasons with the number one pick, spent all his cap space on Trevor Ariza, and then they fired him because he couldn't get a point guard. So it was just a disaster. And now Jones is being given the chance to really just tear everything down. We've seen our training staff of the last 15 years go to the Pelicans, our head trainer anyway, and new training staff are coming in. They've hired Jeff Bauer as Jones's right-hand man, kept Trevor Buckstein along with Jones, who's kind of known as the cap expert and the one that comes up with the weird CBA stuff that teams do every now and then. So it's kind of been turned over to Jones, and he's pretty impressive. I said today he talks the talk in interviews, and now it's just time to see if he can kind of follow it through. And the first thing now that they've got a coach is, as we've harped on quite a bit already in this podcast, is go out and get a point guard, because Tyler Johnson was a free hit. They got him for Ryan Anderson, who was woeful on the Suns. So as far as grading that deal goes, as you said, Tyler's not a pure point, but they won that trade. And he got Kelly Oubre in weird circumstances as well, but you'd have to say that he won that too. So everything until now is being positive around James Jones. But this offseason is going to be crucial for him and my team.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to watch how Williams does with this team. I kind of liked your comp about the Mark Jackson comp. I'm wondering if, in hindsight, maybe if you'd flipped the Williams and Igor hirings, things might have been better off, because I think a lot of those offensive sets that Igor ran, they are important, but I'm wondering if maybe there wasn't much team unity, if that makes any sense at all. I think sometimes you've got to unite a team and a squad before you can really install a system, because otherwise it doesn't necessarily feel right for the players. I know that when the athletic survey came out, that I think other than Tom Thibodeau, the coach people least wanted to play for was Igor. I'm wondering if his kind of more laid back European manner came into that, but I'm also wondering if maybe he didn't necessarily do enough to be a man manager, which is part of it. It's not just all about schemes and X's and O's. You've got to be able to manage people as well. I think that is going to be the interesting thing to watch with Monty Williams.
Yeah, that's the change that they've made for sure. I tend to give Igor the excuse of really the franchise didn't support him and understand his strengths as a coach and give him the things to help bring the team together and allow him to do his job. He was kind of putting out fires from the get-go, as I said, with Ryan McDonough's firing, Devin Booker's injury before the season even started. So for a rookie head coach, which he's going to come in and have flaws and need to learn things on the run a little bit. You don't know everything. Even a guy with 20 years experience in the NBA like him, there's still nothing like running a team yourself or being the head coach. So the organization just failed him as far as I'm concerned. He definitely had his flaws, but they just didn't understand the coach that they were hiring, and they didn't put the right pieces around him to help him do his job. So, yeah, as you said, they've flipped it. I like the analogy of, maybe these two hires should have flipped and Igor should have been the coach that comes in 4 or 5 years' time to take them to another level. So that probably won't happen. He's already been to the Suns twice now, so I can't see him coming back a third time. But, Monty's an interesting one. He's been through a lot, both personally and in the NBA since those New Orleans days. So it'll be interesting. I can't wait to start to see things come out of the Suns in the off season to see if he has changed at all as a coach from those Pelicans teams.
Yeah, coaches can most definitely adapt, and I mean, Quinn Snyder did it. He was a failed college coach, and now he's one of the best coaches in the NBA, so it definitely can happen. Thank you for coming on, David. It's always good to get a perspective from teams that, it's hard to cover all 30 teams. It's good to get experts from a certain team on.
No, I appreciate you having me on, Joe. Anytime, I'm happy to jump on, even before the season. Again, it's always fun to talk about the Suns, even though they're not the most entertaining team to talk about from an on-court standpoint. They are certainly very entertaining off the court and keep my attention a lot of the time. So, yeah, appreciate you having me on, and for anyone who has taken the time to listen to this.
Yeah, and I will double down that. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you for our 300th show next time. Thank you.